All right, here we are on day 2 of lecture. And is there anybody who hasn't had lab yet that has lab tonight? Okay, I was just wondering how many people would be have not done the termite lab yet. So I will talk a little bit about that lab in here. So let's go ahead and get started on this. Let me change the lights. Hopefully I'll be able to. There we go. That's a little bit better. If anyone in here has issues with seeing the PowerPoints, if you have problems with the background or anything, all of them are posted online, so you should be able to see those. Today, what we are going to be talking about, if I can get this to work. Oh, maybe I just went crazy with that. Okay. Today what we're going to be talking about is the beginning of Chapter 1, talking about basically what science is. And hopefully you've all got a pretty good idea of what science is from simply going through high school and that period of time after high school. Science is the Latin word for to know. Science is a body of knowledge and not just a list of facts that you memorize, but it is a way of knowing about the world around us. Inquiry, basically asking questions and then learning. Science is also a pathway to discover and understand the world around us. It is empirical, and that word empirical means testable. So if you are capable of testing it, that is one of the parts of science. Science is a human endeavor, so that means that even though you may have heard science is the way that we prove everything, science is still done by humans. So it's open to interpretation, which means it can go wrong at certain points in time. In science, we use research in order to make our decisions. So getting down a little bit more specifically into biological knowledge, being well-rounded when it comes to biology and science is a necessity in the 21st century. A lot of our health decisions are made based on our understanding of our human bodies and bacteria and viruses. Biology is going to affect our society and the way that we are social. It affects our medical decisions, political decisions. If you think about putting money towards saving the environment or putting money towards keeping endangered species from going extinct, a lot of money is involved in doing science. It is economic. There are places that we travel to all around the world, and those beautiful places that we travel to could not be there in 50 years because of the things that we're doing to the environment. And it also has to do with legal issues. So in order to do biology or understand biology, one of the things you need to possess is the ability to think creatively. I think that a lot of times scientists get a bad rap because people think that they are purely bookworms or that they don't have any creativity or any artistic ability to them. But science does require thinking about things creatively and being able to communicate with others. If we don't tell people the things that we discover as we make observations and as we do experiments, and we don't communicate, then what's the point in doing science? Biology also should be integrated into our decision making for all of those reasons: health, social, medical, political, legal reasons. So when we think about who is a scientist, which we talked a little bit about last time, scientists are inherently curious. We wonder about the world around us. We ask questions about how the world works, and we seek answers as to why things are the way they are. And I thought that this was a great picture to put on here because if you think about what it means to be a youngster or a toddler or a young adult, Scientists are very much the same as children. Children are very curious. They're always asking why. They always have questions about why everything happens around them and how it works. And they're seeking answers in order to understand the world around them. And so scientists, children, I think are very similar to one another. So getting into famous scientists a little bit, I talked a little bit last time about Jane Goodall. She is a very famous scientist. In fact, I think one of the most famous female scientists. And she did what a lot of people think about when they think about being a scientist. She went out into the environment. She went over from, she was born in England. She went into Africa and she studied chimpanzees. And she's been advocating for chimpanzees since the 60s. She went out there, and there were a lot of misconceptions about the way that chimpanzees lived when she first became interested in them. So she was traveling around in Africa, studying these chimpanzees, and she was one of the first people to dispel a myth about chimpanzees. It used to be believed that they were all vegetarian, and she was observing these chimpanzees in the wild, and she found that one ate a bush pig, and that bush pig meat it shared with the other ones around it, and so she was discovered that. And then she also, to tie into the termite lab, she found these chimpanzees taking apart a termite mound and eating those termites. And so they are omnivores, which is very similar to, of course, what we are. And so in talking a little bit about the termites, she also found that it used to be believed that the reason that humans were different than chimpanzees was that humans used tools and chimpanzees did not. If you think about what makes us so different than our closest living ancestor, you think about tools. But she found that these chimpanzees were fashioning long sticks to use basically as a fishing rod, and they would stick them in the termite mounds and pull out the termites and then feast upon this tasty treat. And so if you were to think further, what really separates us from the chimpanzees? Can anybody think of what it is? If it's not tools, what is it? Well, it would be very logical to think that if they stick the stick into the termite mound and pull it out, that they're able to eat those termites. So they display logic, they display emotions. You can tell that they are sad. There have been studies done where they've looked at chimpanzees who've had their babies die, and they hold them in their arms and they cry. So if it's not those things, if it's not emotions and it's not logic, what do you think that it is? Being rational. What is it? Being rational. Rational. I'm not sure exactly whether you can deduce that it's rational decisions or not. But there is one thing that I'm looking for. Okay? They appear to communicate with one another. What do you think? Yes? They have changed over time. If you look at the fossils that we can find, we can actually study them back to about 5 million years ago when it appears to have branched off from that common ancestor. So we'll talk about it coming up here a little bit in Chapter 3, but I'll tell you now, it's cooking. So can you think of any other species out there that cooks its food? No, because there isn't one. So cooking is what makes us different than chimpanzees. Chimpanzees have to spend about 9 hours a day collecting their food and eating all of this food in order to get the energy that they need to survive. Cooking is a way that we allow our food to be able to be digested quicker. And so it's allowed our brains to grow larger. It's allowed us to be smarter. And that's part of what makes us human, is that we cook our food. So how is science a different way of knowing? There are lots of different ways to know about the world around us. Science, however, is empirical. It is testable. So empirical knowledge is based on experimentation and observation. Empirical results can be tested again and again and then corrected as needed. A lot of times our historical ways of understanding the world around us, we can't test them again because once they happen, they happen. Religious ways of understanding the world around us, there's no way to repeat those things because they were a one-shot event. So science is something that we do over and over again and look for evidence of. We do experiments, we make observations, and we can correct our way of thinking if we find out that our way of thinking is not correct. So scientists use this scientific method, which is what we're talking about in lab right now, to produce these testable results. So going back to the idea of curiosity and creativity, science is a collection of facts and a process for understanding the world. In order to gather all of those facts and in order to look at them and understand them, we have to have this natural curiosity. One of the things that we find is that when we ask questions in science, it often leads to 50 more questions. If I say, why is the sky blue? Then that can lead to, what is the chemical makeup of the sky? What is the light spectrum? What are colors? How does the human eye perceive those colors? We can ask all kinds of questions. And it's interesting because it used to be, like we were talking about in the first meeting, that only men did science. And at one point, only white men did science. And so if you are a white man and you're taking this collection of facts and you're trying to make sense of it, somebody who is a black female or an Asian male may have a completely different way of interpreting those facts. And the cool thing about science is that we are open to everybody having a way of understanding those facts if they can explain the reason that they think the way that they do. So as women are starting to get into science and as people of different cultures and different races from different places on the planet look at those sets of facts, they come up with really amazing ways of processing this world all around us. And so the single most important question that underlines scientific thinking is, how do you know that is true? And scientists go about that question every day and in everything that they do. How do you know that is true? What facts do you put together that make you believe or have that understanding? And I think that that's really fascinating because we all ask those questions every day. How do we know that what is happening around us is true? And in this day of social media and sharing, a lot of times we tell people, no, you're wrong, or no, you shouldn't have that opinion. Opinions are brought about by collections of facts, understanding the way that the world works around us. But when somebody disputes those opinions and says, no, that's not true, they can always say, I understand the facts differently. And then in science, we're open to that debate, I think, at any point in time. So we live in this really cool era where we can Google everything. We think, why do we need to memorize all of these facts? Or why do we need to know what a periodic table says? Or why do we need to know these different species? It's important to have a broad understanding of the world around us, but we live in the coolest era, I think, ever, where we can Google everything and have these little computers right at our fingertips and be able to say, why do we think that's true? Well, it's because I Googled it. But you have to be able to tell whether or not knowledge is misrepresentations or whether it's coming from a credible source. And I think that's something that's important we'll talk about over the course of this semester. When something is pseudoscience, we talk about what science is, and then sometimes people can mislead us through what is called pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is something that sounds scientific. It sounds like it could be true, but it may be misleading, or it may not be exactly true. It may be based upon bad science. Pseudoscience is why we should question everything that is put out there that, like in this case, they're trying to get us to spend our money on something because they say in Activia that the bacteria are in it, the probiotics are going to help your digestive system. That in Dan Active it can help your immunity to drink that shake, or in Airborne that this vitamin C burst will help you from getting the flu. And in all of these cases, they make very scientific-sounding claims that they try to put out there, and you would think that they are true, but a lot of times they're based on things that are a little bit misleading. So how can you tell if it's true or not? This was an interesting quote, and it has to do with science and the law. People a lot of times don't put those two things together, but this U.S. Supreme Court justice said, scientific issues permeate the law. I believe that in this age of science, we must build legal foundations that are sound in science as well as in the law. The result, in my view, will further not only the interests of truth, but also those of justice. So if you think about things like DNA fingerprinting, or looking at misleading claims that people try to make money off of, or looking at things like eyewitnesses, which we're going to talk about coming up here, and looking at things like bioethics. Just because we can do something, does it mean we should do something? Does it mean it's legal to do something? Think about things like cloning. Just because we could clone a human, if we could, I don't know that it has been done yet, but it'll be coming up here in the next decade or so. Just because we could clone a human, is it ethical to do that? Is it legal to do that? It's going to be very interesting to see where science and the law are going to meet up. So here's something that's a little bit more random. Why and when do people develop superstitions? If you think about what a superstition is, say that I believe before I come in here to lecture that I need to do a specific routine in order for my lecture to go okay. And if I don't do that, then it's not going to go okay. Or if you think about your favorite baseball player that goes out to the mound and he taps the bat on his foot and he moves the ball around in a certain way, and he believes that if he doesn't do that, that he's not going to be able to hit the ball. In thinking about superstitions, can animals be superstitious? Here we have, some people have a lucky charm, like that's a rabbit's foot. Some people believe that the number 13 is very unlucky. You've seen people crossing their fingers before, or going to have their palms read, going to psychics. And so, can animals be superstitious? What do you think?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe you have read ahead a little bit. Yes. Good. So let's see, where did I? Oh, that'll be coming up here. So in looking at superstitions, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what is science? What is biology? These are some interesting questions that we can answer based upon having a knowledge of science. Why is morning breath so stinky? And can you do anything to prevent it? Think about, could we set up a test? Is there a way to experiment about why your mouth has this disgusting flavor in your mouth in the morning? And what could we do to prevent it? Why is it always windy on streets with tall buildings? If any of you guys have ever walked around here on campus, if you go over by the Polymer building, there's always a breeze going through there. Or if you go over to Schrank Hall North, down into the terrace level, if you go through there, it's always got wind that's whipping through there. So why does it feel more windy on streets with tall buildings than out in the open? And then finally, does taking aspirin before drinking alcohol lead to faster intoxication? Think about whether we could set up an experiment in order to test that. And the answer is we can set up experiments to test all of these things, and a lot of them have to do with biology. Maybe when you think about asking a question, you think about going to Google and typing it in. If you go to Yahoo, you can go to Yahoo Answers. And I've read through some of these questions, and some of them are like, well, if you just would Google it, you would know what the answer is. It's basically, these people are typing in their questions and waiting for somebody else to Google it. So in science, we can always ask questions, but how do we know that the answer is correct? If we don't have enough of an understanding about the way that the world works around us, then how would we know if the answer to our questions is correct? Science is not simply fact after fact after fact, or just a periodic table, or just a family tree. It's not just a body of knowledge or a list of facts or vocabulary words for you to memorize, but it's an intellectual activity. We have to go out there and make observations of what's happening in the world around us. We write down those descriptions that we share with other people. We do experiments and explain those natural phenomena. And so back to the idea of airborne, a lot of times people make scientific claims, or they put scientific sounding things on their packages in order to get us to buy those things. Because if it sounds like it's good science, then a lot of times we're going to be like, oh, well, then I should do that, because who wants to get sick? The idea behind airborne was that you take these little tablets and dissolve them in your drink, and after you dissolve them, you drink that, you get this vitamin C and other vitamin burst to your system, and then you won't get sick. You won't get the flu. And it was developed by a school teacher who was trying not to get the flu every fall at her school. And so they said, if you're going to go on an airplane, you should take this. If you're going to be stuck in an office around sick people, you should take this. Anybody who goes to schools, if any of you live in the dorms, you know that in the fall, once one person gets sick, it seems like it spreads throughout the entire dorm. They said people who work in restaurants or go to health clubs, if you're going to be in the theater. So basically, anytime you're going to be surrounded by a bunch of people who might be sick, if you take this, you lessen your chance of getting the flu. And so this was marketed this way for a very long time. A lot of people bought airborne thinking that they weren't going to get sick. And so can we actually trust the packaging claims that companies make? We wonder if there is like the FDA that's monitoring these things and doing clinical drug trials and collecting evidence to find out whether the package of airborne, the claims that they make, are true. The reason that airborne came into the spotlight is because some people said, well, did you do any tests to find out whether airborne actually works? And the CEO of airborne said, yes, we did these clinical trials to find out whether airborne works. And the people said, well, can we see those trials? And he said, no, people are not really scientifically minded enough to be able to understand a clinical trial. And so airborne got sued, and once they sued, they had to produce the clinical trial that they said that they had done, and they had never done it. So basically, everything they had put on their package was a lie. And so we wonder, can we really trust these things, these scientific sounding claims that we hear these companies make? And so you don't have to be at the mercy of people who might lie to you, people who might try to take your money fraudulently, marketers who try and make something sound scientific, but it's really, there's no science behind it. They use science to try to advertise things or make slick packaging. What we're going to be learning over the course of this semester is what exactly it means to have scientific proof or evidence of our claims. and we'll learn what it means to think scientifically. So, scientific literacy is how we think scientifically, how we use that knowledge once we have it to make wise decisions, because what's the point of having this knowledge if you're not actually using it? It's becoming increasingly important in our lives, and the matters of biology are especially essential for the reasons that we've talked about here in class. So being scientifically literate, even though none of you are planning to be scientists, or at least that's what I'm assuming is that none of you are going to be scientists, becoming scientifically literate is important to being a good citizen, being a good parent, being somebody who makes good health decisions, and somebody who relies on science to understand the world around us. So I believe I already did that slide. I might have repeated it. So here are some of the ideas of things that are in the news nowadays. Some of you may have heard about this link between vaccines and autism. And so the story behind that is that there was a study that was published, I believe in 1986, that said that a scientist had found a link between giving your child the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and these children getting autism. And what he basically made it sound like was that if you give your kid a vaccine, that they will develop some kind of autism. And this was such a wild claim that people began getting really upset about it. They were not getting their kids vaccinated. We were seeing things like these diseases that we had almost completely gotten rid of coming back. And it has been shown through huge trials and through clinical studies that vaccines and autism are not linked. And so this vaccine paper that this scientist had written, it actually had to be retracted from the scientific journal, and that's a big deal. And he was actually stripped of his medical doctor title. And so that is something that we still hear today, is that vaccines and autism are linked, and they are not. We hear a lot about things like global warming. Any of you who are involved in sports have probably heard about steroids. Now we talk about things like the human growth hormone, and about blood doping, and about oxygenation. And so all of these things have to do with living things, or the way that living things affect us. So it's important to at least have a foundational knowledge to be able to understand, does that make sense or does it not? So this scientific method is a powerful approach to understanding the world around us. So much so that a religious leader, the Dalai Lama, said that if science proves some belief of Buddhism to be wrong, then Buddhism will have to change. We've even had religious conversations out there like the Catholic Church and evolution. The Catholic Church has actually said, okay, we do know that evolution has occurred based upon the science. So are we understanding the world around us based on religion, or based on science, or based on a combination of both? I think that's interesting for the Dalai Lama to come out and say that, because it's such a strong way of saying that science is a really valid way of understanding the world around us. So, bless you. Okay, going back to the idea of superstition. What this study was they put this rat in a container, and they set it up so that they could observe him, and there was a lever over on the side of the cage where if he pushed on the lever, he would get a food pellet. And so he could hang out there in his cage, and whenever he was hungry, he would go over and hit the lever and get the food pellet. So they had many, many rats in many, many cages doing the same thing. And then they changed the rules a little bit. They changed it so that when the rats that were used to going over, hit the lever, get the food, when the rats would go over and hit the lever, there would be a 10-second pause before they would get the food. So if you imagine the first time that they did this, the rat goes over, he hits the lever, expecting the food. 10 seconds later, the food finally comes out. What does he do within that period of 10 seconds where he's not getting the food that he expected? He may go over and sniff in the corner of his cage. He may turn around a couple of times. He may tap on the glass. And he may come to think that whatever he's doing will affect the amount of time that it takes for the food to come out. And so what this is basically an animal becoming superstitious about a phenomenon that's actually going to happen anyways. When you believe that there is something that you're doing that's going to affect the outcome of the experiment, then that is a superstition. Sometimes the things that you're actually doing do affect the outcome of an experiment. But in this case, it doesn't matter how many times he turns around, how many times he taps on the glass, but the food is going to come out 10 seconds later. But what the rat is expecting is for the food to come out immediately. And then he believes that based on what he does, makes the food come out 10 seconds later. So we can actually train animals to be superstitious. And that's part of our survival mechanisms. If you think about like walking on a very tall cliff, humans are naturally afraid of heights. And that is because if you've ever been up high on something, people fall off of things that are tall. And so how would you know that you could fall off of a cliff if you had never seen a cliff before? It's something that humans have this innate understanding that heights are a scary thing and should be avoided. Rats believe that they're going to get their food, and then 10 seconds later it's going to come out. So the reason that we believe the things that we believe is based part of the way on experience, the way that we experience the world around us, and part of the reason based upon what we presuppose or believe is going to happen based upon how we interact with our environment. So if we're going to study something and understand the scientific method, the first step in the scientific method, as you all saw with the termites this week, is that we have to make observations. We looked at the termites and we said, why do they behave the way that they do? Why do they look the way that they do? Why do they act the way that they do? We can propose some kind of explanation why we think that they're doing what they do. And then we test the proposed explanation through a series of experiments. And we either find out that the reason we believed is valid, or we can revise that experiment or try alternative experiments and come up with alternative explanations for it. So science always has to start with this observation of some kind of phenomenon. So why is the sky blue? Why is a plant green? Why do I get sick after sitting in a classroom with a bunch of sick people? Observe this phenomenon and propose your explanation for it. Scientific thinking, as I said, always has to be empirical. It has to be based on experiences and observations that are 1, rational, 2, testable, and 3, repeatable. So it has to be capable of being done more than once. So if we look at these 4 statements, and we ask which of these statements below is based upon empirical information. The first one, knocking on wood ensures a good outcome. Well, what does ensures mean? How do we know that knocking on wood is going to cause something good to happen? One and the other don't necessarily have anything to do with one another. So that would not be based on empirical information. The second one, since most elementary school teachers are female, females make better elementary school teachers than males. Those 2 things, that more teachers are female, so therefore they make better elementary school teachers, those 2 things are not tied together. Just because there's more of something doesn't make it better. And better who gets to decide what's better? They get better test scores, they have better relationships with their students. Who gets to decide what exactly is better? So that's not empirical information either. Number 3, we had a really cool spring this year, therefore climate change, global warming must not be happening. I hear this one a lot on Facebook where people say, oh, look at the weather outside. It's cold in the middle of the summer. If you think about when you left your house this morning, it was in the 60s. Maybe you brought a hoodie with you. So if we say, wow, we had this really cool spring this year, and I'm assuming they mean cool temperature-wise, not cool like awesome. We had a really cool spring this year, therefore climate change must not be happening. That one is not based upon testicle. Wow, empirical and testable are now testicle. Good thing I have that recorded, huh? That'll be a YouTube clip. Empirical. So we have climate change. Climate change is testable based upon the climate readings and different variables from all around the world. And we know that the climate is getting warmer because we have climate data going back 100 years. But just in the past 30 years, we've seen the Earth's temperature rising. We've seen the global or the Antarctic and the Arctic ice caps melting. And we know that we're starting to have wild weather patterns based upon the climate changing. So that one is also not empirical. Number 4, chicken is a healthier source of protein because it contains less saturated fat than beef. That is something that we can actually test. There is the fat levels in chicken and the fat levels in beef, what type of fat that is, and therefore what kind of protein is a healthier source, so something that makes it a better or more nutritional food source for people. That one is based on empirical evidence. So in this picture, this is so interesting. I don't know if they talked about it in your book, but this flower that is found out in the rainforest in Africa, this flower has developed over and evolved over years and years and millions of years to smell like rotting flesh. And so when we think of flowers, we think of them smelling really good. This one smells like rotting flesh. And so it attracts all of these flies, and the flies come and they land on this flower, and they pick up the pollen, and then they transfer it around to the same flower all around the rainforest. And when people first found this flower, they're like, well, why doesn't it smell good? Why isn't it like other flowers that are so pretty and they smell so good? After testing and after multiple observations of it, they saw why it smelled the way that it did. And so scientists went out and they collected all kinds of data about this plant species and collected data about the flies that were around it and figured out why their observation was actually happening. So that would be pretty gross if we had that around here. So in thinking of the scientific method, we often think that it's a very rigid process, but that's not actually true. We can make multiple observations, and that can cause us to ask more questions. The scientific method is never just a recipe where you do one thing, then you do the next thing, and then you do the next thing. It's this adaptable process where we can ask questions, go back and make more observations. We can do different types of experiments. The experiment might lead to more questions. And so the scientific method is really, I say a messy cycle, but it's more of an adaptable process. It moves forward, it moves backwards, it moves, it's overlapping with lots of questions, and it's always open to interpretation. So it includes many different methods. As I said, the basic steps of the scientific method: make observations, formulate a hypothesis. So that hypothesis is something that is testable. It's a statement that says, because of this, this will happen. And we can test that. So we devise a testable prediction, conduct this critical experiment, so it should say controlled experiment, and then draw conclusions and make revisions. So here we're going to look at one hypothesis and see how we follow it through the scientific method. So the first step, make observations. Second step, formulate a hypothesis, devise a testable prediction, conduct an experiment, and draw conclusions and make revisions and communicate those to the outside world. So what should you do when you believe, when something that you believe in turns out to be wrong? That's kind of the nice thing about science, is that whenever we find out that something that we believe is wrong, like for example, if I had said, I believe that the termites follow the line because they're following the indentation in the paper. Or I believe that the termites are following the line because they follow the wider line rather than the skinnier line. One of the nice things about science, or the most important feature of science, is that it tells us when we should change our minds. If something we find out is a piece of evidence that makes us change our minds, then we're capable of taking this box that we believe science to be fit in and expanding the box or refining the box. We're able to admit that sometimes we make mistakes. If you think back to times when people believed the Earth was flat, when we came up with new information that said, oh, the Earth is actually round. We as scientists changed our mind. And sometimes that thing is so deeply ingrained inside of us that it's really hard to change our minds. But as scientists, we need to be capable of doing that. Here I'm going to put this up on the website. It was an interesting article that I read today, because I thought, oh, what are some of the things that people used to believe that they don't believe anymore? And they talked about things like bloodletting. It used to be, back for anybody that's a history buff, it used to be that they thought that if you got sick, if you cut somebody's vein open and take most of their blood out, that they will get better because the body will form new blood and they will be healthy again. And imagine how many times that experiment went wrong. What was some of the other ones? The one about the flat Earth, the one about believing that the Earth was the center of the universe, and there were some other really interesting ones on there. So the question we're going to look at here, the hypothesis, does taking echinacea reduce the intensity or duration of the common cold? The first thing that we would do in this experiment is to make this observation. A lot of people, you can go to Target or Walmart, you can buy echinacea, and it says right on the bottle that it helps you with your immunity, or that it can cause the duration of the common cold to be shorter. So people believe that taking echinacea can make the intensity or duration of the symptoms of a common cold be less. And so the second thing that they do, form this hypothesis, something that we can test. Echinacea reduces the duration and severity of the common cold. So in order to be useful, this hypothesis must accomplish two things. It must clearly establish mutually exclusive alternative explanations for the phenomenon, and it must generate testable predictions. So in devising a testable prediction, we evaluate the validity of a hypothesis by putting it to the test. And so researchers often pose this hypothesis as a negative statement, which is called a null hypothesis, saying that there's no relationship between the two factors. So in the echinacea experiment, we could say, hypothesis. Echinacea reduces the duration and severity of the common cold. So the null hypothesis would say that echinacea doesn't do anything to the duration or severity of the common cold. So we could go about doing this test to either say that it does reduce it or it doesn't reduce it. So they're mutually exclusive. They're the two opposites. It either does or it doesn't, and we can test and we can prove that. So keep in mind that we can always have several possible explanations that could be true. In the case of the echinacea experiment, it's either it does reduce it or it doesn't reduce it. So the goal is to propose a situation that will give a particular outcome if your hypothesis is true, but that will give a different outcome if your hypothesis is not true. So thinking about echinacea, it's either going to reduce the duration of the cold or it's not going to do anything to the duration of the cold. So it's got a particular outcome one way and a different outcome the other way. So here's another example of a hypothesis. Eyewitness testimony is always accurate. So we could make predictions about eyewitness testimony. Our prediction would be individuals who have witnessed a crime will correctly identify the criminal regardless of whether multiple subjects or suspects are presented one at a time or all at the same time in a lineup. So it used to be eyewitness testimony was considered to be the hallmark of the judicial system. If you saw somebody do it, then they must have done it. This has put how many people into jail for murders and for rapes, that somebody saw them do it and they were prosecuted just based on eyewitness testimony. So at one point, somebody who was investigating these cases said, well, I wonder if I put all of the suspects in a lineup and you look at them all at once, or if we present them one at a time, whether or not the people are more likely to be able to identify the person who committed the crime. We can all think of what a police lineup looks like, where everybody stands in front of the thing to see how tall they are, and you get to look at people who look similar, and supposedly one of those people had to have committed the crime. So think about what happens if that person isn't in the lineup. If you're an eyewitness and you're trying to look at this lineup and you think, okay, there's 6 people here in front of me, one of them had to have committed the crime, what if there is not the criminal actually in the lineup? And then they thought, well, what if we put the people in the lineup in front of the eyewitness one at a time? And they look at one person, and then they look at the next person, and then they look at the next person. So there started to be some questions about whether eyewitness testimony was actually accurate or not. So we could test our hypothesis about whether eyewitness testimony is actually accurate or not. So we could devise some kind of testable prediction. Going back to the echinacea experiment, if echinacea reduces the duration and the symptoms of a common cold, then what we do is we get a bunch of people who have colds, and in half of them, we give them echinacea, and in the other half, we don't treat them with echinacea. And then we make predictions about it. Our prediction could be that if echinacea reduces the duration and severity of the symptoms of the common cold, then, if they take it, then there's going to be less sick people less frequently, and they're going to get over their colds more quickly. So we have this testable prediction. Here we have our critical experiment. So let's say we have a big group of volunteers, and we divide them into 4 groups. And we decide to test whether or not the effects of echinacea are going to reduce the duration and the symptoms of the common cold. So when we have separated them into these 4 groups, we have our first group that we're going to give a placebo tablet to. A placebo is basically like a sugar pill or a pill that doesn't have any active ingredients in it. And then we have our second group that we're going to give the echinacea tablet to. So both of those first two groups are going to get a pill, but they don't know whether it is a placebo or whether it actually has the active ingredient, which is echinacea, in it. And then in groups 3 and 4, so the first groups 1 and 2 receive tablets for 7 days longer than groups 3 and 4 in order to determine if treatment prior to exposure has any effect on the development or duration of symptoms. So sometimes you would think, oh, if I take echinacea all the time, then I'm less likely to get sick. And this other group thinks, oh, if we start taking echinacea once we get sick, it should reduce the amount of time that we are sick. So one of the hallmarks of these experiments, though, is that we need to use a placebo and the active ingredient, and we need to have a group that has no treatment, because just like the termite experiment, we need to know what's happening naturally. So after 1 week, we find that all individuals are exposed to this cold-causing virus, and we can look at the results from the 4 different groups. Groups 1 and 2 receive tablets for 7 days longer than the groups 3 and 4 in order to determine if the treatment prior to exposure has an effect on the development or duration of the symptoms. So that is important, because how are we going to know what's happening in our experiments or whether our initial hypothesis is valid or not if it's not supported by the data? Data is really important to collect when it comes to either supporting or not supporting our hypotheses. And if we don't have the correct amount of data, we should either adjust our hypothesis or adjust our experiment. As we talked about with experiments in this week with the termites, we need to know what the termites do naturally in order to know whether our hypothesis is supported or not supported. So we make revisions at that point. We further refine our hypothesis, we ask better questions, we make new and more specifically testable predictions, and then we communicate our results. So does echinacea help prevent the common cold? We have our treatment groups. Group 1, placebo, both before and after exposure. Group 2, echinacea before and after exposure. Group 3, the placebo after exposure. And Group 4, the echinacea after exposure. And what our conclusions of our experiment show is that individuals from all 4 groups are equally likely to develop a cold. And so cold symptoms lasted for the same amount of time in all of the groups. So therefore, echinacea had no effect on the duration or the severity of the cold. And so when we find that, that something happened that we didn't expect to happen, then often what we do is we either go back and repeat that experiment, or we further refine our experiment so that we can see if there was some other factor at play in these experimental groups. And so our hypothesis that echinacea reduces the duration and severity of the symptoms of the common cold was disproven. So if we prove a hypothesis, and we prove it over multiple times, multiple experiments in multiple different ways, when does a hypothesis become a theory? There are 2 distinct levels of understanding that scientists use in describing our knowledge about natural phenomenon. A hypothesis is that immediately testable experiment, and then a theory is not just a guess. A theory is when we have multiple hypotheses, and we test it over and over and over again, and that hypothesis always turns out to be true. So a hypothesis is a proposed explanation for a phenomenon, which leads to that testable prediction. And a theory is a hypothesis for natural phenomenon that is exceptionally well supported by the data. Like I talked about in the lab this week, where we have multiple. Oh, I just forgot what I was going to say. Theory is a hypothesis for natural phenomenon that is. I'm talking about some different theories that we have out there, like cell theory. Cell theory says that all living things out there are made up of at least one or more cells. And cell theory, we have never found a living thing that's not made up of cells. And so we know that cell theory is exceptionally well supported because we've never found anything that's alive that's not made of cells. So it has withstood the test of time, and it's unlikely to be altered by any new evidence. But if we found a living thing out there that was not made up of cells, then that new evidence would cause us to change our minds. It's not likely we're going to find a living thing that's not made of cells, but if we did, we would change our minds. So theories versus hypotheses. Theories are repeatedly tested. They are much broader in scope, and they're going to be exceptionally well supported. Oh. Sorry, my thing is sticking. Elements common to most experiments, that we have these treatments, this experimental condition applied to individuals. We have an experimental group where they're given the particular treatment. And like in our echinacea experiment, we have a group that are treated identically but are not exposed to the actual experimental treatment. And then we look at variables. Characteristics of your experiment that are subject to change. So we have different types of variables, the ones that will measure and the ones that will change. We have to be able to control those variables because if we don't know what happens naturally, then we don't know, bless you, whether or not we have a good experiment. We attempt to minimize any differences between a control group and an experimental group other than the treatment itself. And so the placebo effect, a lot of times what we find is that this phenomenon in which people respond favorably to any treatment. So people get one type of pill, and then the other group that gets the sugar pill, they believe that they're getting better, and so they do get better. Kind of has to do with the mind over matter phenomenon. And so the placebo effect highlights the need for comparisons of treatment effects with an appropriate control group. Also, it highlights the need for things like double-blind studies, where the people who are doing the experiment don't know which group is getting the placebo and which group is getting the treatment. And we find that a lot of times in drug studies where the doctors who are giving the pills don't know whether it's a placebo pill or the real pill because they look identical, and that way the doctors can't have an effect on the experiment. This was something that was really cool that was described in your book. There was a horse named Clever Hans, and he was billed as a horse who could do math. And so his owner would go out there with the horse, and he would say, okay, somebody give me an addition problem. And the person would say, what's 8 plus 9? And so he would turn to Clever Hans, the horse, and he would say, all right, Clever Hans, what's 8 plus 9? And the horse would tap its foot, and it would get up to 17, and then it would stop. And he would say, see, the horse can do math. And he would do all kinds of mathematical problems with this horse, and the horse would always tap its foot the correct number of times. And so he went on the road with Clever Hans, and at one point somebody said, I wonder if Clever Hans does the same thing if his owner isn't there. And so somebody else took Clever Hans out, and they did the experiment, and Clever Hans didn't seem to be able to do math when his owner wasn't around. And so what they eventually found was that Clever Hans was capable of picking up cues from his owner about what he was supposed to do. And so if the owner knew the answer to the math problem, then Clever Hans knew the answer to the math problem. If the owner didn't know, then Hans didn't know. And so this was a type of experiment that we could do that was based upon these very, very subtle cues. And we could test with the owner, without the owner. If the owner knew the answer, if he didn't know the answer. There's a lot of things out there that seem like they could be true, but just based on the fact that you change one variable, whether the owner knows the answer or not, or whether the owner is there or not, we can find out whether Hans can actually do what he was proposing to be able to do. So, like I said about experimental designs, a blind experimental design is where the experimental subjects do not know if they're getting a treatment. This one is up to a lot of controversy, though. Let's say that you are an AIDS patient, and you go in to do a clinical trial, and you don't know whether you're actually getting the drug to treat your disease or not treat your disease. Is it ethical to not treat somebody in one group and treat the other group? And then once they do know whether or not the drugs work, shouldn't they be given to everybody who has that disease? So there's a lot of controversy about doing these types of experiments where people's lives hang in the balance. And then these double-blind experimental designs where the subjects don't know and the experimenter doesn't know which treatment the person is receiving. So one of the hallmarks of an extremely well-designed experiment is that it is blind or double-blind and that it is a randomized experiment. So the people aren't put into groups based on what the researchers think, but they are randomly put into these groups, whether it's an experimental group or a control group. So when we have repeatable experiments or trials that we can do multiple times, they increase our confidence in the results. Sometimes, though, we find that science can be misleading, and we wonder, how can we know whether or not it's misleading? We've got to be able to watch out for biases. Like in the case of Clever Hans, his owner was biased to making these subtle cues when he would figure out these math problems, and that was biasing this experiment, whether or not Hans could actually do what he was claiming to do. We found that scientists can sometimes be sexist. Even though we don't mean to have these biases, people naturally have biases, and we have to be able to watch out for those in our experiments. This was a case of papers published in the scientific community, and whether or not they were accepted by the scientific community. So what they found was that when the sex of the leading author is known by the reviewers, fewer papers by women are accepted for publication. So, like when we submit papers for publication, anymore we don't submit first and last name. We only submit last name and initial, because that way we're able to tell. We're not able to tell whether the author is male or a female, because there are some inherent biases out there where the reviewer knows that the sex of the author is male or female, and they reject the article. However, if they do not know the sex of the author, then we find that more of those papers are accepted. So scientists, even when they don't mean to, can have those biases. So we try and design experiments so that those things don't affect us. So scientific thinking can help us to make wise decisions, but it can also make us more confused than we were before we started. This is the final slide here, and this is one that you saw already in the lab about independent versus dependent variables. Some when you have an independent variable, that is some measurable entity that's available at the start of the process and whose value can be changed as required. So independent variable a lot of times is time, and dependent variable is the thing that is measured. So we might look at the number of times something happens over time. The independent variable is time, and the dependent variable, the thing that is measured, is the number of times that thing happens. So like in the biases of the scientific papers, we can measure how many times these articles are accepted or how many times they're rejected, and based whether or not the person knows if the reviewer or if the author is a male or a female. So that ends up for today. You don't have anything that's in your in Springboard to do for the next time, so I will see you guys the next time. If you haven't gotten your books yet, I suggest that you do that. You should have read at least Chapter 1, and we'll be getting into Chapter 2 next Tuesday, and have a wonderful weekend. Yay! If you have those syllabi pages that you signed, I would love to get that from you. And I'll put links to everything on Springboard, to the presentation and to the audio recordings and all of that good stuff. And I suppose I should ask, are there any questions? As everybody runs out the door? No homework, yay! Thank you, ma'am. Yes, it is close to here. Thank you. Actually, I'll walk back by there, so if you want to wait, we can walk.
Okay. I came in late. I wanted to tell you
Yes.
that there's no handle to the back door.
Really?
I was out there.
I'm sorry. I had no idea. Okay, well, I'll find out what's going on with that.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to crack it.
I certainly will. That is a great idea. Thank you for letting me know. I'm sorry. I
I
had
didn't know about these things, and I was trying not to disturb, and I'm like, she's scared.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
and I
it.
was like, maybe somebody will hear me, and then luckily one of the guys opened it. But secondly, I need a syllabus.
Oh, they're right there on the front desk.
Okay.
Yes.
I have your lab right after this.
Okay.
And there were no more lab manuals in the library, so I was just wondering what I should do for that today.
Thank you. You're okay for today. They should have more in.
But yeah, I ordered it already, so I'll
Great.
have it for next time.
Great.
But I was just wondering for today. I don't
Today you'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So, without, like, I don't want to, my brother-in-law and his family went to Norton High School.
Oh,
So I
really?
texted my sister as soon as I left the other day, and I was like, I don't want to ask her when she graduated.
95.
Oh, okay. So they were 84 and 87.
Oh, my goodness.
So, yeah. So I was like, I don't think she's as old as them, but I don't know, you know? So.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, he actually, sorry, go ahead.
What were their names?
Kaufman, Chuck, and Ron.
Chuck was my band director.
Well, that's what I was going to say. He teaches band there.
Wow, yeah, I was
yes.
in the band. How funny.
Yes, so yeah, he's still doing that.
That is
He
amazing.
has kids now, too, that are
Aw,
teenagers. and-
fantastic.
Yeah, wow.
Cool, small world.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just the syllabus.
I try to make it to lab, but I spend like 40 minutes looking for parking.
Uh-oh.
So I'll try and come earlier to find parking.
On Springboard, I put like a recording of what happened in the first lab. So if you go on and watch that and get the syllabus for lab, you should be in good shape. Yeah. Okay? Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, wait, you can hit me, my daughter. You know, I went to lab last night, and I'm supposed to go tonight. And I
Oh,
did
was
the
there anybody there?
Yeah, we had class last night. I mean, not last night.
On
before
Tuesday.
that, Tuesday.
Yeah.
So do I have to go tonight? Give the inset thing. And
I would go over and tell them what you did, and it's okay if you don't go tonight. Because if you already did it, then
Yeah, I
then
did the inset. The two girls that were civil service said, you supposed to went tonight. You was with us the other night. I said, well, I gotta go up there and let her know. I went.
Oh, okay.
I did the termite.
Great. Good. Hello. Oh, I just need the back page.
Oh,
You get to keep all the fun stuff.
perfect.
Oh, fun.
I will be missing this days.
Those dates
because I have soccer games.
Well, thankfully I put everything online, so you'll be able to get it.
Awesome. I think it's only the exam that I will be absent for.
Oh, okay.
I also have like a letter. I don't know if you want it. I don't know if I'm supposed to give it to you or not, but I can hand it in because I have